I'll just make sure that my clicker's working. And it is, so we're off to a good start. Hello, my name is Lisa Varley. I'm from Australia. I'm the Managing Director of Beacon Medical, which is a subsidiary of Vivo Cannabis. We have many brands. We're very proud of what we've achieved in Australia. Over the last 12 months, we grew our flower sales by over 100%. And we are leaders in Australia in the field of selling flower. I will take you through the Australian landscape, the market, the dynamics, the regulations, and how we see it as a patient. This is something very close to my heart because I'm actually a patient. So medicinal cannabis has been life-changing for me. I'm a lifelong insomniac, and if I don't sleep, I don't cope, and I get hemiplegic migraine, which makes my life virtually impossible. I had a very huge drug load, which I was able to reduce by 90% by being able to use medicinal cannabis. I personally don't like to smoke, so I use an oil. I use 0.6 ml of a high THC oil every night, and it really has had a remarkable outcome for me. It's interesting because my background is that I've also worked for a company called Pharma, which is opioids. Now, it's really exciting to me that cannabis is opioid sparing, and the fact that we can reduce our drug load and be healthier and happier. And as the gentleman said before, I don't drink alcohol, but why not get drunk and get healthy at the same time? So there's really, really good reasons for doing this. Today, I will introduce the company and explain to you what we do. I will give you a snapshot of the Australian market. We'll look at the regulatory landscape, which in Australia is very challenging because it's very hard to get a straight answer out of anybody. We'll look at patient access and the dynamics of that. We'll look at a patient's perspective because after all, the most important thing we do is help people. We'll look at emerging trends in Australia and the market. And we'll look at the future in Australia. So, Vivo Cannabis has helped deliver superior care for over 100,000 patients through their medical clinical network, and they have many, many brands. Vivo changed its name from the original corporation Abcan in 2018. Abcan gained their license in March 2014 to cultivate, and Canna Farms was one of the first cannabis houses, and we have many, many brands. Our recreational brands include Fireside and Lumina. Our medical brand, Beacon Medical, is sold in Europe and Australia, predominantly in Europe and Germany. And in Canada, we have a medical arm and we also have a recreational arm. We sell over 100 different SKUs in Canada and we sell every format possible, whereas in Australia and in Germany, we only sell flower products. We had 7 flower products in market last year, ranging from 18% THC, no, actually 15% THC, all the way up to 25% THC. And we just launched 2 new products in Australia, both 25% THC. Breaking news is that Vivo Cannabis has just been bought by Medifarm, and it's quite a synergistic coupling because Medifarm focus on oils and vapes, and we focus on flower. We do sell, though, dried flower, oils, soft gels, vapes, suppositories, any format that is possible, but that's mainly servicing the recreational market in Canada. This is just examples of some of the different products that we sell. So these are our facilities. So we have one facility in Napanee and another facility in Ontario. One of our facilities is full EU GMP, so that's the facility that we use to manufacture everything that we export to Australia and to Canada, and then the other facility is used for the local products that they sell in Canada. We also have a clinic network called Harvest Medical. We have 3 sort of on-the-ground clinics, and we have telehealth all over Canada. In Australia, we have a very different model. In Australia, we choose to focus on what we're great at, which is cultivating flower, which is cultivated in Canada. And then in Australia, we just have a very small team on the ground. There's 2 of us. And our sales in 2021 were 6 million. and our sales in 2022 were over 11 million. It's an interesting dynamic in the Australian market because a lot of doctors don't want to know about cannabis. They don't want to touch it. Some patients will go to their doctor and their doctor will recommend them to a cannabis clinic. Other doctors will say to their patients, if I find out that you're getting cannabis, I don't want to see you anymore. So it's really, really not fair. The other problem we have is driving. If you get caught with THC in your system, it can be a jailable offence, which I personally find really unfair. In Tasmania, you're allowed to drive. Victoria are looking at changing the laws. And I was just actually speaking to Chloe, who's from Australia, and she said in Queensland they're looking at doing the same thing. But it just really bothers me. You know, you can drive around full of opioids, and I've had operations and I've had opioids after an operation, and I shouldn't be let loose in public because there's no way that I'm safe or that I'm safe to drive on the road. So our namesake, Beacon, let us be your guiding light. We really, really want to help people. Our products, compared to the other products in Australia, are at a very reasonable price range. In fact, I'm surprised when I'm here in Thailand looking at the products, I can buy it much cheaper in Australia, which I find fascinating. So our mission is to advance patient care and look after people. All of the people that I work with in Canada, including the founder, are patients themselves, and this is why they have such a strong interest in cannabis. As I said, we focus on flower in Australia. We have 9 products in market. We will soon be introducing oils and vapes, but we'll be having the vapes with the oil. So it's interesting because the real truth is that in Australia, many patients are actually recreational patients, but they're sourcing the product through a medical pathway. There's a lot of stigma around this because we have this, I'm not sure if you've heard of something called Reddit. So we have the patients getting on Reddit complaining about there's not enough trichomes, there's not enough smell, it's damp, it's dry, it's this, that and the other. That's when you know that it's not a real medical patient, because a real medical patient wouldn't even understand what that meant. The real medical patient is looking for a clinical outcome. Mind you, some recreational patients possibly have anxiety and they're probably trying to manage things like that, and possibly they're using the products for sleep as well. This is a snapshot of the companies in Australia. It's very interesting that the top 10 companies represent 93% of all sales. The company in Australia that has the largest sales is a company called Canatrek, and they have 25% market share. Beacon are equal fourth with another company. We're actually quite proud of that, given that those other companies have a huge range of SKUs and a huge range of format, whereas Beacon at the moment still only has flower. As I said, until last year we only had 7, and we introduced 2 more this year. We don't see the need to have a huge, vast range of products. Most of our products are indica dominant, and we have 2 sativas. So we have a different range for different people. Now the regulatory landscape. This is the biggest challenge in Australia. Trying to get a straight answer out of anybody is actually like winning the lottery. The TGA will tell you that they give you guidance only, and then they will suggest that you talk to an independent regulatory expert. However, the independent regulatory expert is only getting information from the TGA, and it's still guidance. Recently, they've started to fine people quite heavily, and one company I know that was fined had actually been liaising with the TGA. They'd asked what they should be doing, they took advice, they did everything they were told, and yet they were still fined. The interesting thing is now they're now fighting their fines, and it looks like that they might have those fines taken away. But it's not a fair landscape when you're told, oh, you should be doing this, but we're not really sure, we'll kind of get back to you later. So everybody's sort of flying blind to some extent. So what's regulated? Everything, absolutely everything. You have to have license to cultivate, you have to have license to import, you have to have license to export, you have to have a license to be able to sell. The TGA is the equivalent of, say, the American FDA, so it's the Therapeutic Goods Administration, and they're the body that governs. We have another problem in Australia in that we have federal laws and then we have state laws, and the states like to disagree with the federal laws, which makes it more confusing for everybody. Our GMP standards are the TGO 93. Those standards are being updated and reviewed all the time. New standards come into play on the 1st of July, where all products must be EU GMP or full GMP, whereas previously that hasn't been necessary. So what does it all mean? It means that there's a lot of people who are very, very confused, none the least who are the patients. And for Beacon Medical, our focus is the patients. As I said, we focus on one thing only, which is educating and selling high quality products to patients to give them benefits and better quality of life, help manage all sorts of illnesses and better reduce their medication load. So where do I start? This is a really good question. A patient will either hear about this from a friend, they'll read about something, or they'll ask their local doctor. As I said previously, some doctors will say, I don't know anything, I'll refer you to a clinic. Other doctors will say, if you start using medicinal cannabis, I won't see you anymore, which I find really unfair. Cost is also a limiting factor because a lot of patients need two products. They might have a flower for acute episodes or for chronic pain, and they may use an oil at night. The Beacon products are quite reasonably priced compared to other products in the market. All of our products cost $149. However, if you're paying $149, you need an oil as well. That might be $200. We're looking at $350, which for some people is just really not affordable. Also, there's the drawback of driving and the fact that you could lose your license. So where do I go for further information? It seems one of the most prolific sites for information for us is a website called Reddit. And Reddit is primarily driven by patients, and it also seems to be primarily driven by recreational patients. So the information there is mostly about the trichomes and the size of the buds and the look of the product, more than the therapeutic effects and the value that it offers for people. So the process of getting cannabis in Australia also is not that simple. We started off with a system called SASB, which means that you had to go to your doctor, he would have to make an application to the government, and it could take a few days for that to come back. We've now moved further forward. We have a process called authorised prescriber, and a doctor may apply to become an authorised prescriber, and then they're able to prescribe on the spot, which makes things a lot easier for the patients. We also now have product categories. So we have category 1, which is a predominantly CBD medicine, and then we have category 2, which is CBD dominant, but still only up to 60%. Then we've got the category 3, which is balanced, and then category 4, and then category 5, high THC. A federal law came in that you could substitute. There's often quite a lot of problems in Australia with out of stock. So it's not fair that a patient has to go and see the doctor and then potentially they have to go back and have another appointment, another consultation to be able to get another prescription. However, as I said, the states all do things differently, and in New South Wales, for example, where I come from, you're not allowed to substitute. So we get two different types of data. We get the SASB data and we get the authorised prescriber data. It's very interesting. There's 2 or 3 other ways that we can get data from the Australian market, and nobody's data matches up with anybody else's data. So it's really, really hard to figure out what's going on, and they've only just started to report AP data. What I can tell you is that the 2 biggest wholesalers in the country, who also have clinics, etc., have revenues in excess of $120 million a year. Now that's just 2 companies. So if we look at the indications, the main indication remains chronic pain. It's better. And then the second indication is anxiety. If we look at patient demographics, the age group that uses cannabis the most is 18 to 44-year-old age bracket. And then we move on to the 45 to 64-year-old age bracket. I've actually got links here where you can look up this data if you're interested. And here we have consulting location and dosage form. The state that has the most applications is Queensland. That's where Dr. Tay comes from. He'll be able to tell you more about that. And the dosage form, this tells us, or the data from the TGA tells us, that oil is the highest dosage form, but others will tell you that it's flower. It's interesting though that the other formats don't really get a look in yet. It's predominantly oil and flower in our market. The vape market is growing, however, we're yet to find actually really, really good quality vapes because they all seem to leak. Now we move on to prescribing data for AP. The most recent data I have is that we now have 1,807 AP or authorised prescribers in Australia. When you think that we have 26,000 GPs in Australia approximately, it's not really that much. And there's been 25,726 applications. You can see that we got off to a very slow start in 2018 and 2019. We started to get really good growth by 2021, and in 2022 the growth is just really starting to fly. I think in Australia we will see this explode once the driving laws change. That is the biggest drawback that we have. And I can say as a patient, taking 0.6 mil at night, when I wake up in the morning, there's absolutely nothing wrong with me and I feel perfectly safe to drive. Here again, the consulting location, Queensland is far and away the highest prescribers in the country, and the dosage format remains the same, whether it's from authorised prescribers or whether it's from patients accessing SASB. I think though the SASB applications will die out, they're just too time consuming. So what does the future hold? Legalisation, I think we're a long way off in Australia. It's a very personal view about whether it should be legalised or whether it shouldn't. In Tasmania, which is our smallest state, you actually are allowed to drive. And in Canberra, which is not our capital territory, but it's where our parliament sits, you're actually allowed to grow 3 plants at home. So none of the rules make any sense in Australia. Clinical trials, there have recently been 2 clinical trials started for sleep and what we call S3, so that would be over-the-counter medicine. Neither of these trials did very well, and they've actually stopped both of them. The trials were with pure CBD. I don't know what other people think. For myself, I don't find that pure CBD helps with sleep. It could help reduce anxiety, which may help with sleep. So we're just going to have to wait and see. Clinical trials take a long time. They're very, very expensive. And the jury's still out if you could ever actually register a flower, because how are you going to standardise it? If you're growing flower outside, every single crop's going to be different. So it'll be really interesting to see what happens in that regard. Again, different formats. They're not taking off in Australia yet. It'll be interesting to see what happens. Once we get more awareness of the products and their usefulness in areas such as palliative care, oncology, etc., hopefully people will be open to other formats, because patches, suppositories, capsules all have a place. So that would actually be good. The biggest thing, or the biggest issue we face, is resources and education. Until about a year or 2 ago, Australia was not open to learning or understand about medicinal cannabis. We're seeing that change, which is fantastic. Pharmacists now are really interested, and they help educate and talk to patients when they get their prescriptions. That's all I have for you today. I'll be here for the next 2 days. I'm happy to answer any questions or talk to you about the Australian market and market entry and all the different idiosyncrasies and all the things that we face in Australia. Thank you.